What is it about our fascination with horror? Since the dawn of our existence, we have been telling scary stories in an attempt to cause terrifying, thrilling delights. And of course, in modern years, the horror genre has lived on in the world of cinema, a cinematic genre which is often overlooked, but one that has been a leading pioneer in the industry. Well, because I'm in a spooky old house, we are going to go back in time to the granddad of horror movies, Dracula 1931. The 1931 Universal Dracula motion picture, one of the most influential, if not the most influential horror movie of all time. A film which birthed a plethora of horror movie iconography. A movie which terrified its audience upon release. It tells the story of the evil Count Dracula, played by Bela Lugosi, a vampire creature of the night from Transylvania, who arrives in London to prey on his next victim, Mina, where it's up to vampire hunter Van Helsing to destroy this suave but terrifying hellbeast. This movie was not only a triumph for Universal Pictures, but also movie making in general. But despite the fact that it's now over 90 years old, do we know all there is to be known about this classic movie? Could Dracula be hiding any more secrets? So today we're going to be looking into 10 things that you may not know about the 1931 Dracula movie. So, let's check it out. Number 10. Creating the Creature of the Night. Dracula was the creation of Irish author Bram Stoker. At the time of creating Dracula, Stoker was a manager of a London theatre. He also wrote novels, which were mainly romance tales and sensational stories. However, in 1897, Stoker would publish his 7th book, that of course being Dracula. It's been suggested that Stoker got the influence of Dracula when learning about 15th century ruler Vlad Dracula, otherwise known as Vlad the Impaler, where Stoker's haunting tale transpires of a vampire creature of the night called Count Dracula, who brings with him terror and plague, and haunts the blood of his victims. A timeless, ageless monster that's beyond our realm of understanding, where Dracula is hunted by his nemesis, the vampire hunter Abraham Van Helsing. Despite being well received upon being published, Dracula didn't find Stoker the financial riches that he had hoped for, and the true height of its impact would only be fully realised until after Stoker's death. As it stands, Dracula is one of the most important and influential works of literature, with it never going out of print, even to this day. And so, this dark gothic story, which is told in the form of diary entries and letters by its characters, is without a doubt one of the greatest stories of all time, also giving us one of the most recognisable characters of all time. Its importance is up there with the likes of Shakespeare. Number 9. 2 Dracula movies were made before the Universal movie. Bram Stoker himself had tried to get his story into other medias, such as movies and stage shows. He even wrote his own Dracula screenplay called Dracula or the Dead. Sadly, Stoker would pass away in 1912, never knowing the full extent of his creation. The haunting tale of Dracula would start to be retold on screen in the early days of cinema, including a 1921 Hungarian movie called Dracula's Death, which is now considered a lost movie, and the ever-famous 1922 German expressionism nightmare Nosferatu, which is still considered one of the most frightening movies of all time, thanks to its terrifying visuals. Now, this movie caused huge legal issues because the filmmakers didn't get permission to use the Dracula story, which led to a copyright infringement, and all prints of the movie were ordered to be destroyed. Yeah, and you thought the YouTube copyright system was harsh. Thankfully, some of them survived, and the image of Count Orlok, This movie's Count Dracula equivalent is considered to be both generally really grotesque and the most iconic image of the fictional vampire. The memorably creepy part was played by a German actor called Max Schreck. Number 8. Then there was a stage show. The 1931 Universal Dracula movie as we know it was in part based on a 1924 stage show, also called Dracula. It first premiered in England, where Dracula was played by a variety of actors, including British actor Raymond Huntley. However, when the stage show would reach American shores, it was decided to change up the story a bit for an American audience. In those days, the vampire mythology in the US was mainly the vampire-esque character, whom were seductive vampires, so it was decided to change Dracula to a suave, seductive creature of the night, one with a European charm and allure, where we get a Hungarian immigrant who left his homeland to escape political difficulties to seek riches in the US, Bela Lugosi, who was cast as the onstage Dracula for the 1927 revival of the play. Lugosi's allure and appeal of Dracula captivated the imagination of the audience. He truly wined and dined Broadway as the world's most iconic vampire. And so the play caught the attention of Universal Pictures. Now, Universal had already made a lot of money on 2 previous horror movie productions, those being The Hunchback of Notre Dame and The Phantom of the Opera. The studio's co-founder and owner, Carl Laemmle, was not a fan of horror movies, nor did he really have a desire to make horror movies. However, his son, Carl Laemmle Jr., who was also a producer for Universal, loved horror and really wanted to bring the Dracula stage show onto the big screen. And thus, he convinced his father to put the movie into production, where the rights of the book and play were purchased for $40,000. And the rest, as they say, is history. Number 7. Casting Dracula. Despite the fact that Bela Lugosi had successfully played the part of Dracula on the stage show and that he was lobbying for the part on the big screen, he wasn't the first choice to play Dracula. Nope, that was American actor Lon Chaney, who was the master of playing movie ghouls, especially when it came to monstrous makeup, making him a true master of his craft, and a pioneer in the industry. However, Chaney's sudden death in 1930 changed everything, as the production lost their Dracula. If you can believe it, the production still wasn't interested in hiring Lugosi, with many other actors being sought after for the part. An actor called Lou Ayres was hired to play Dracula, but he was then replaced by an actor called Robert Ames. But he then got recast with David Manners, who instead would go on to play the part of John Harker. After Lugosi's many bids and struggles to get the part, he finally won the production over. It may have had something to do with the measly $500 per week salary that he accepted, which was quite low for its time, especially when taken into account that all up he would make $3,500 for his work on Dracula. And so he was now the movie screen version of Dracula. Casting Lugosi as Dracula may have seemed like a gamble to Universal, but it was clearly a gamble that paid off. Number 6. Filming location. The production of Dracula was something of a milestone, as it was the first Dracula movie to feature sound. The picture was directed by American director Todd Browning, whom had made several silent movies with Lon Chaney, and seemed to have an eye for the macabre. It is also said that the movie was also directed by cinematographer Carl Friend, although he went uncredited. The script was written by playwright Garrett Fort, who would also go on to write the script for Universal's Frankenstein. Despite being set in an ancient castle in Transylvania and the dark streets of London, the shoot actually took place in California, namely Universal City Soundstages in the San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles. The production was given a budget of $355,000, but the production would only go on to use $341,000. Dracula was originally meant to be a big, lavish production, but sadly the Great Depression got in the way of that. And incidentally, the production itself of Dracula was described as unorganized. Number 5. Changes in the script. So there were several significant changes that were made to the script of Dracula in the movie's early days of development. It was originally intended to start the movie with Dracula as an old man, but then when he gets to London and starts feeding, he rejuvenates into a young man. With a notion of Dracula being played by two actors, an elderly actor and a younger actor, but this idea was scrapped. Likewise, the movie was to start off with the Jonathan Harker character visiting Dracula's castle in Transylvania, as in the book and the play that the movie was based off. However, this changed to the bug-eating Renfield character. Speaking of which, can we just take a moment to fully appreciate actor Dwight Frye's performance as Renfield? The guy is such an unhinged and insane lunatic. He is fully just off the scales and is just nuts. And it is a truly brilliant and captivating performance. There was also to be a scene where Dracula passionately kisses the Mina character, but that scene was rejected as it was considered too taboo and raunchy. Yes, this is 1931, no kissing here, thank you. Speaking of which, Mina was played by actress Helen Chandler, who was a big Broadway stage actress, as she was actually the highest paid of the cast, as her salary was $750 per week. And finally, noises of Dracula groaning in pain after he gets impaled in the movie's climax had to be toned down, as the sounds were considered too gruesome and horrific. Number 4. Dracula was made back-to-back with a Spanish version. So most horror movie enthusiasts know about the Universal Bela Lugosi Dracula movie, but it was actually filmed back-to-back with another Dracula movie, simply titled, well, Dracula. Only this Dracula was filmed in Spanish, in order to find a market for Spanish-speaking audiences. This Dracula production even used the same sets and equipment as the English-speaking version, with filming of the American version at day and the Spanish version at night. And the fact that the two movies shared the same production explains why the movies look and feel very similar. In fact, the Spanish version of Dracula's running time was half an hour longer than the English-speaking one. Dracula was played by Spanish actor Carlos Villarreal, and I think he makes a terrific Dracula. He looks the part and generally has a creepy but alluring presence. This version of Dracula was released in Cuba 1931, but not too long after that, this alternative Dracula was considered a forgotten movie, with it being believed that all prints of this Dracula picture were lost. But a print of this Dracula caper was discovered in the late 70s in New Jersey, which brought this version of Dracula back to the conversation. Interestingly, there are actually many people who prefer the Spanish version of Dracula to the English one, and it is common belief to be a superior movie from a technical standpoint. Number 3. The Scoreless Dracula. If you can believe it, Dracula didn't have a musical score. Now, you have to remember that this was the early days of cinema, and it was felt that providing scores for movies was considered too pricey. For the movie's opening credits, the second act of Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake was used, and the track would go on to be reused 1 year later for the opening to Universal's fellow monster movie, The Mummy. Back then, movie scores and soundtracks probably weren't considered as pivotal as they are now. In fact, upon its release, some movie theatre locations showed Dracula as a silent movie, as movies with sounds, otherwise known as talkies, hadn't fully caught on yet. However, Dracula would finally get a movie score, but not until 1999, a whole 68 years after Dracula's original release, where composer Philip Glass was commissioned to come up with a new score. This new score could be heard on a new VHS release of Dracula at that time. Now, with later DVD releases, you could have the option to watch the movie with or without the 1999 score. And whereas I actually like the score and do think that the sound goes with the movie, I guess I'm a fan of seeing movies as they were originally made, and enjoying them without George Lucasing them. Number 2. The Quirks of Bela Lugosi. It seems that Bela Lugosi had his own unique way of preparing himself into the headspace of Dracula when it came to filming. He was very distant from the rest of the cast and crew, and apart from saying good morning at the start of the shoot and goodbye at the end of the shoot, he mainly just kept to himself. He was polite and courteous, and was a gentleman, but really had his own way of doing things. He would often bemuse his co-stars by his way of getting ready for the role, where he would stand in front of a full-body mirror and strike poses with his cape while shouting out, "I am Dracula." In fact, his co-star, Mina actress Helen Chandler, would go on to laugh at this ritual, and like everyone else, found it odd and amusing, and questioned if Lugosi was genuinely just a really odd guy. But hey, a wonderful performance and on-screen presence came out of it. So I say let Lugosi prepare for his scenes however he wants. Equally fascinating, some of the cast members didn't think much of the Dracula movie. Lugosi turned down an immediate offer to reprise the part of Dracula in another movie, as he didn't want to be typecast. Helen Chandler didn't think highly of her role on the account of playing a pale girl in a trance state with her arms stretched out, despite the fact that Mina would become her most memorable screen role, a fact that probably really irritated her. And Van Helsing actor Edward Van Sloan also really didn't like the movie either. Upon reflecting on the movie in a letter to his nephew, he described the movie as, quote, overplayed, overwritten, altogether lousy. Isn't it interesting that you have this movie that would go on to be considered timeless and a pioneering film in the way of cinema, and yet several actors who were associated with Dracula really weren't proud of it? Number 1. The world fell in love with Dracula. Dracula terrified the world when it was released in February 1931. Universal were quite nervous about Dracula, as the studio didn't know how American audiences would respond to a motion picture horror movie, fearing that it would lose money. But Dracula was a successful hit. It would altogether go on to make $700,000 upon its initial release, which made it the highest grossing movie Universal had released that year, and thus it put the Universal movie monster era into overdrive. Something that helped its box office intake were newspaper reports of people going to see Dracula and fainting over just how horrific and scary the movie was. This intrigued people. It captured their imaginations. It made them want to see Dracula, for if anything, sheer curiosity, to see if they themselves could get terrified by this new chilling motion picture. And let's be honest, who doesn't love a good, safe scare? One that completely shocked viewers and cemented the reality that horror does have a place in cinema, which can safely deliver viewers great joy and thrills. And the world of cinematic horror has never been the same since. Although it may be hard to understand now, but for its time, Dracula was actually a really scary movie. Dracula would also become one of the most important movies in the history of cinema, one that paved the way for things to come and inspired the path that horror would take, of which it hasn't stopped since. Yes, it may seem dated now, I mean, of course it is, but you've got to see it as a relic of its time, a time capsule of when the world was completely different and cinema was in its infancy. And I think once you get that mindset, you can see that Dracula is a marvel in filmmaking and an important chapter in the history of motion picture. And of course, one major standout aspect of Dracula is Bela Lugosi himself. He really made the part his own, and shaped the way of how we would perceive the character of Dracula, and possibly vampires in general. As mentioned, he did have a fear of being typecast, but in hindsight, he created the common iconography that we associate with Dracula. Now, Bela Lugosi could never escape the image of Dracula, and he sadly passed away in 1956. But the legendary performance that he gave us in 1931 will live on forever. Well, that was my history of Dracula, and with this film, a spark was ignited that transcended a love that audience would have for watching a movie to get some scares. It is indeed an addiction that never went away. Anyway, I'm Minty, and beware the shadows that lurk in the night. They may be after your blood. See ya!